Hello, this is Michelle from East Ave Art, and today I am going to go over my whole process to put together this pretty landscape of a Christmas tree. And I did this in watercolor, so I'm going to start with my process, which is to activate my paints. I've also taped down some of the edges around my watercolor paper just so I can get a nice clean edge. And I activate my paints with water first, just to help them to be a little bit more vibrant. So I'm going to start with kind of the sky. It's going to be a nighttime sky. So I'm going to mix up some gray and indigo and really add in a lot of water. You can see that I spritzed some water from my water bottle in there as well. And I really want to get a lot of paint mixed up because I'm going to be painting over a large swath of my canvas here. So I'm also going to add in some white to my sky color. I just think that gives it a nice like creamy effect. And I'm going to just start by wetting the whole page with my mop brush that you see me using here. So I want to be able to lay down a lot of water very quickly. So this is where a mop brush comes in really well. And one of the ways that you can always check to make sure that you've wet the paper sufficiently is you can see how shiny it is once, and you can see I'm kind of like lifting up my paper just so that I can kind of see whether the shine is there that I'm looking for to know whether I've wet that. So you do kind of want to take a look to make sure you've evenly wet your page before you go in with your paint. And so I'm going to put in my sky color here that I spent a bunch of time mixing up. So I'm also going to bring that sky color down onto the snow because it's a nighttime painting. The snow isn't going to be like white. It's going to have that a little bit of effect of, you know, grayish blue that you see when you look at the snow at night. And as you can see, I keep having to mix up more paint for that night sky. I just really never make enough. So once this dries, I'm actually going to use some masking fluid that you see that I've grabbed here. And I'm going to do that so that I can paint in the colors of the lights on the tree after painting in the tree itself. I don't want to spend a lot of time, or waste time, I should say, you know, having to paint around sort of delicately to avoid where I wanted to have the lights, because obviously the tree color will be much darker than the light color. So I'm going to lay down this masking fluid, and I did this once my background layer dried, but I'm going to lay down this masking fluid in the areas where I want to paint in some lights on the trees. And I'm going to wait for that to dry. And from there, I'm going to paint in some of the background trees. So I've mixed up a really watery gray green. Because these trees are in the background, I want them to be a lighter color. And I'm also going to place them on the canvas a little bit further back so that the viewer gets this sense of perspective. This tree is behind the main tree in both ways, both because the paint is lighter, or the tree will be lighter, and it'll be further back, just perspective wise too, in terms of placement. And so my process for painting these evergreen trees, they're really my favorite tree to paint. I am from the Northeast. I've recently returned to the Northeast where I grew up, and I'm just in love with looking at these like year-round green trees. They're just beautiful to me. So my process for them is I kind of just start with a vertical line, as you saw I did a minute or so ago. And then I have a few of the needles and little branches kind of pointing vertically up at the top. And then as you progress down the tree, you can see that the branches and needles are sort of pointing down. And I'm going to go over this with some white gouache later to reflect, the snow on the trees. And I'm going to do the other painting in the background much with the similar process. So I start with just sort of that vertical line, and you can see the first few branches are sort of more pointed upwards, kind of towards the sky. And then as I descend down the tree, the branches and needles start to sort of point towards the ground. So since this is kind of the same process, I'm going to skip ahead to my next step. All right, so you can see my other tree in the background there is completed. So now I'm going to do a different kind of tree, a more kind of standard, I guess what you would call a deciduous tree that would be bare this time of year. So I'm just going to paint a trunk and then some branches coming off of that trunk. And again, I'm doing this actually even with a more watered down color than the evergreen trees that you see in the front, because I actually want to give the effect that this tree that I'm currently painting is actually further behind my evergreens. And again, I think I'm doing that through the color and also, well, not so much the color, but the shade, I guess, as well as just the placement of the trees. And I'm also going to paint another deciduous, I guess, tree in the background as well. And once all of that dries, so I want everything to be dry before I start in with my primary tree, which you see me doing now. And I follow the same process every time. I start with a vertical line. I get some of the initial branches and needles focused upwards, and this is where you really want to be using the tip of your paintbrush to get those kind of precise thin lines that you would see on a pine tree. And so as I continue to descend down the pine tree, my branches and needles are going to be facing more towards the ground. And that also gives the effect, once I paint the snow on, of those branches and trees being sort of like weighed down by the snow. And another kind of tip I would include about painting these kinds of evergreens or pine trees is that you really want to make sure that they're not like cookie cutter perfect looking. So you want the sides to be, somewhat uneven. Don't make it super precise or parallel. Because if you look at nature, and this is kind of one of the fun things about painting sort of the natural world, is it's not perfect. It's uneven, and I kind of like that wildness, and that your paintings don't have to be perfect. In fact, if they are perfect, they'll look a little bit off to the viewer. And another thing I would add is, as I'm painting this tree, I can just paint right over where the masking fluid is, and it will protect the paper underneath from that color. And so it really allows me to paint this tree unencumbered. I don't have to take extra time to avoid certain areas. So it's really worthwhile to use the masking fluid in this way. This kind of scene is just truly one of my favorites to paint. I feel like winter, it can get long, it can get a little bit to where you're feeling the doldrums of winter, especially as it extends into late winter, especially around February, I would say. But I think this time of year in, December, in the Northeast in the United States, it's just kind of magical. We had our first snow in the region where I'm living today. So I just loved kind of looking outside and seeing the first snow of the season. It just feels like a really special time of the year. And I always feel that when I paint something like this, I just get this sense of coziness. I don't know if it relates to childhood. I spent a lot of time playing out in the snow as a kid, but it really brings up a lot of happy memories and good times. So I always kind of relive that a little bit as I paint this scene. One other thing I would point out about this particular tree is you can see that I've added a little bit more green into my mix. It's a very dark green. Obviously, that's that evergreen or hunter green. But I wanted the green to be much more clear because the tree is closer to you as a viewer, so you can see its color a little bit better than the sort of grayed out trees that you're seeing in the background. And so hopefully as this painting starts to come together, you can see the contrast between the tree that's in the foreground and the trees that are in the background, and that's giving you that sense of like depth. So I think you should have a good sense for how I at least put down the first layer of these trees. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Once I finished the tree in the foreground, I kind of felt like I needed a little bit more sort of in front of those trees that are in the way back. So I put in another evergreen there, which you see me doing. At this point in my process, it looks a little bit like the trees are just hovering over the ground. And so you'll see I take a little bit of water on my brush and a little bit of the shadow color, and I'm kind of just smudging to create like a shadow for the trees that they would be casting on the ground. And so hopefully that gives it a little bit more of a sense of it's sitting on something, so there's some depth. And now the way that I am able to remove the masking fluid is simply with an eraser. It's pretty convenient and easy to do that. And you can see that that masking fluid protected the paper, and I'm now able to add in all the different colored lights that I want to add to this painting. This is just kind of my first layer of the lights, but I'm going to be putting in some like blue and red and yellow, and I'll show you in a few minutes what I'm going to do to make those lights pop a little bit more. But before I do that, I'm going to take this very old bit of white gouache and I'm going to mix in a little bit of black to get somewhat of a grayed out, and I'm also going to put some gray in there as well. I'm trying to gray out my gouache, but because gouache is a thicker consistency, it has more opacity than watercolor, I can actually cover up some of the watercolor. So this is how I'm going to achieve some of the shadows on the snow that's on the ground that you would just see from like wind gusts. And I think that gives it a sense of realism because it's not just kind of a flat sheet of white, right? So you can see kind of the swirls and eddies that the wind leaves in the snow. And I just kind of play around with this, like I'll add more of the white gouache just to kind of get a lighter color to paint onto the trees that are in the background that would, you know, of course, like the evergreen sort of pine trees, they really hold on to the snow in a snowstorm. So you can see I'm painting my background trees first, and while I did add a little bit more white into there, I still have this like very grayed out white because again, it's a little bit further in the background perspective wise, so the colors wouldn't be quite as sharp. And I'm going to use the same color to paint the other, you know, sort of evergreen trees in the background, just in the same way. Again, I try to angle my brush in different directions. Sometimes I'm kind of going more off to the side horizontally. Sometimes I'm angling the brush downwards, and I'm trying to give like a 3D dimension to where you can see the snow is sort of just sitting on these branches. So I think this kind of shows the gist of it. So I'm going to fast forward through the other trees. So when it comes time to paint the tree that's in the foreground, I'm actually going to start with somewhat more of a grayed out white gouache. So it's not pure white. And part of the reason is I want there to be a little bit of shadow even on the snow. So I'm going to start with like a grayer version of the snow that's going to be kind of more of a shadowy snow. And then I noticed that the initial gouache that I had laid down in the background trees for the snow, it kind of looked a lot more faded than I wanted it to. So I went in with a more white gouache and, added some more snow back in. And I think that achieved the effect that I was looking for. And then I decided to whiten some branches of the snow on my tree in the foreground as well. So this part is super fun. I'm going to get a bunch of white gouache and water on my brush, and I'm going to tap my brush over my painting just to get the snowflakes. And you're not quite finished until you peel off the washi tape, although it's kind of awkward how close some of my other illustrations are there. But as you can see, I was able to cut that out, and there's my final reveal. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Thanks.